Corinth in the times of Jesus, Corinth in the times of Paul, was a real commercial crossroads. Let's just think of it that way. One of the places in what was still a fairly small world in those centuries, one of the places where persons from all over came. But Corinth was also a place where Greeks learned to argue. I mean that in a good sense. They'd go to the marketplace and some topic would be discussed in the form of pros and cons and pros and cons. And that's where the form of debate came. Paul was very good at that, the Apostle Paul. So when he wrote his letters to the church in Corinth, he wrote 2 of them, he was dealing with a congregation that was made up from all sorts of people with all sorts of backgrounds. They were coming to this new faithfulness, this new way of life from so many different angles that there were often questions about, well, since Jesus was Jewish and since the call to be Christian was first to Jews, does that mean that if persons weren't Jews, they have to become a Jew first before they can be a Christian? Just those kinds of things. And of course, in Corinth, that was for an argument. So they were always wondering. And then Paul himself was challenged by some of the people in Corinth, not only because he had successfully argued in some of the marketplaces there with some of the Greeks and other philosophers, but also because they wondered what authority he came with. How did he know how to work with all these different people? Because he only had his background. So what I'm going to read, these few verses this morning, come from a part of that letter, the first letter to the church in Corinth, where he's trying to explain, well, himself to them, but he's trying to explain more than that, his approach to trying to be one for everyone. I read from the 9th chapter, beginning at the 16th verse. If I proclaim the gospel, this gives me no ground for boasting, for an obligation is laid on me, and woe to me if I do not proclaim the gospel. For if I do this of my own will, I have a reward, but if not of my own will, I am entrusted with a commission. What then is my reward? Just this, that in my proclamation I may make the gospel free of charge, so as not to make full use of my rights in the gospel. But though I am free with respect to all, I have made myself a slave to all, so that I might win more of them. To the Jews, I became a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law, I have become as one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so that I might win those who are under the law. To those outside the law, I became as one outside the law, although I myself am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so that I might win those who are outside the law. To the weak, I became weak, so that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that I might by all means save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, so that I may share in its blessings. Here ends the reading of Scripture. May God grant its meaning to our hearts and our minds. Did you get a sense from those verses from Paul's letter to Corinth how maybe wise that man was? But also remember where he had come from. He was a brilliant and dedicated scholar of the Jewish law. And he had taken a position before his new faith came upon him. He had taken a position where he went from place to place to place to persecute and prosecute known Christians. Did you remember that? That's who that man was that's now writing verses like that. somewhere along there, his new life, his new vision of how to be and of the world gave him the insight that every single person, every other, is valuable. Every other has the right to come at this new faith from a different place than he did. Did you at least get that from those verses? That's what he meant when he said, you know, if I become a Jew for some Jews so that Jews might come to this faith. For others who are under the law, even though I'm not, I become as one under the law so that they can come to this faith, and so on. Remember those? That's what he was trying to say. But he himself had to work at understanding them, at becoming almost one of them, even though he knew he wasn't, so that they might see that this faithfulness is also for them. Keep that in mind. The tutoring ministry that we're a part of now, as part of our new beginnings, started this past Wednesday. I signed up to be a tutor. Now, I had done things like this, especially in inner cities in the past, but never on any regular basis. And I was more like the male figure in a class of kids, and I'd just go in once in a while and like read a book, and sometimes it would take 2 hours because they didn't want to stop. You know, so I had done that, but I always got to leave right quick. This time, boy, you know, I've committed myself to go Wednesday after Wednesday after Wednesday to help tutor young children. I don't know how to put this, but I don't have a special affinity for, nor do young children have a special affinity for each other, me. So I got to be honest with you. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to do this, that I'd walk in there and they'd run away from me, you know, like, who's the ogre there? Or that I'd have to keep myself from, you know, wringing their necks every 2 seconds or something. That's not at all what happened. But I wondered how I, at my age, at my not exactly loving to be around little kids for hours upon a time, was going to do. Well, one of the students that is coming for tutoring happened to get assigned to me as a tutor. And as I started working with the student, we were doing reading. I can read, and the stuff wasn't too hard, but there was this printed sheet of spelling words along with some reading that done in a book. Okay, so that, and going back and forth between that and learning the spelling words, some of the words on the paper, if you can try to picture this, were in cursive writing rather than print. Does that make sense? Rather than the block print. I thought they'd given up on that, but evidently not. And I have to admit that I can almost write as well as whoever did that cursive writing on that printed paper. But the student with whom I was working obviously could read well from the beginning. That student was not a bad reader at all. 4th grader, by the way. But every time went to the cursive, had a real hard time figuring out what it said. So I'm trying to get into this and be friendly, and so finally it occurred to me, hey, I have to wear glasses, because if I took them off, guess what? I could hardly see the paper, let alone the cursive writing. And even with my glasses on, a couple of those words, the R was very poorly written. It looked like an E. And she was having trouble. So I just happened to say, I think you're a good reader, but you're having trouble. Are you having trouble seeing these words? And the answer was yes, because I, being the student, am supposed to wear reading glasses. So I asked, well, why aren't you? because my dog stepped on them and broke them. And my parents said that we can't afford to buy new ones. Now I asked her a little bit more and things like this. And so we went and did math after that. I didn't want her to have to try to do something that she had the ability to do it taken away from her by not having the glasses. Why should she struggle? You see what I mean? But if I hadn't thought that this kid can read, why is she having trouble? Trying to get into her. Why are you having trouble? I wouldn't have found out that she needed glasses. By the way, she's going to get glasses. The principal has funds that it's only like $100, she said. She said, no problem at all. So I hope when I get to see my student this week that there will be glasses on the head. And she'll have to do her reading then. But anyway, but seriously, I thought of that when I was struggling with this scripture about a sermon today, and boom, I sort of became my student. How could somebody obviously be a good reader but be having trouble with these words? That as soon as she figured out what the word was, she already had known it because she couldn't see them. But it was because I didn't just tell myself, well, no wonder she needs tutoring, she can't read. Or no wonder she needs tutoring, she's just slow, or something like that. Does that make any sense that's what came to me after I was struggling with these scriptures? That there's something about if we're going to give ourselves to another person, that other person might live. That's sort of, as you know, my mantra about what it means to live the way of Christ. That's what the cross means. It doesn't mean to die. It means to give yourself to others. If we're going to do that, how do we know what part of ourselves to give? Have you ever thought of that problem? Have you? We've talked before, haven't we, about how if we keep moving forward in new beginnings like it looks like we're being led to do, that the idea of feeding body, mind, and spirit could also include feeding stomachs with food. And that maybe the tutoring will work out so that after the tutoring's over, we might have it here instead of at the school, and then when the parents come, we can all have a meal together. We've talked about that, haven't we? What if they don't really need food, but what they need is for the parents to learn how to read? What about that? Did you know that that's a huge problem still in the United States, and it's getting worse instead of better? Adult illiteracy is one of the reasons there are so many jobs going open out in our economy right now. People don't have enough literacy to read the ad that says there is a job, and if somebody reads it to them, they can't fill out the application. Did you know that? I would be shocked if some of the parents of some of our kids that we're tutoring aren't illiterate, or so barely literate that they can't really function as adults. Did you know that our denomination has developed a really good ministry for adult literacy? How many people knew that? Anybody? Lori, you knew that. Where's Lori? Oh, okay. she's teaching. Okay. But seriously, we have that because the larger church involved with people in need has found that that's a big need. So if we, in trying to give ourselves to the people that we come across in Lowell, think that they need food, and we give them that and do a good job of it, we might miss out on what else or what they really need. Does that make some sense? How are we going to know this? How are we going to know this? How do we become one of them? How do we become her or him when we're sitting there eating with them? How do we do that? Anybody have some ideas? Paul's right here. If we want to bring Christ to them, we have to become them. First become, that's the trick. How do we do it? Anybody have an idea? Anybody? Build a relationship. What does that mean? That's the beginning. What if they're afraid to talk back? Because you know what happens if you aren't very literate as an adult? How many of you have ever worked in this area? Anybody? People who aren't very literate as adults don't talk very much. They don't talk to each other, so their kids grow up in houses where there isn't much adult conversation. They go to kindergarten, they're already 2 years behind the other kids in their class who live in houses where adults talk to each other. It's just, but if they're illiterate, they're going to have a hard time talking to us. It might take some time, huh? It might take convincing the people we're trying to give ourselves to that not only do we care about them, but that we value them. See, if Paul is doing all his things to meet with somebody who is never a Jew, who is never under the Jewish law, who still wants to be a Christian, they got to think, hey, I haven't got the goods here. You know, he was this great lawyer and all this stuff. I'm afraid to talk to him. He found some way to be genuine enough to them that they would speak with him, that let him know what they needed, what would bring them to a new life. Can you imagine yourself doing that with another person? First of all, spending time, sitting down to talk, but trying really hard every time you get an opportunity to let them get to know you, to trust you, to know that you aren't trying to change them into you, but that you're there to help them if they want the help, and if they know that this would help, that we'll find a way to get it. Can you imagine yourself doing that? Is there somebody here who can't imagine herself or himself doing something like that? Wow. We might get someplace. Really? What's our goal in all this? To relate to people? Is that our goal? Or is that a means to an end, or is that the end in and of itself? Good question, huh? See, I'm playing the Greek guy now. Yeah, and wow, wouldn't it be something if these hypothetical persons we're talking about right now felt like, wow, this person from the church is actually affirming me. I can't read, and yet they care, and they don't think I'm a dummy. They just want to know me. And I can tell them this, and they'll tell me a story about, how they had some problems or what, But it is the relationship, huh? Without that, there's nothing. Would you agree with that? Yeah, I think I was thinking more along the lines of once you get to the point in a relationship where it's a strong relationship, then you don't really need to be concerned about how it's going to turn into, or whether it's going to be a positive. Yeah, the relationship, it has its own life then. It goes on a journey, and you can't tell it where to go. It's going to go somewhere, and it's going to have these two people, so that there would be boundaries because of the 2 or 4, 20 or 100 people. Nancy, you were going to say something. Yeah. You didn't tell them what a dummy they were. Yeah, see? There's a relationship that might go someplace. And so if someday at Flat River Outreach they find out that there's a program for adult literacy, that they could just tell the people they're trying to help say, how would you like to learn to read and write? Really, it's not too late. This is one old dog you can teach new tricks to, honest. They might believe you. Louder, I can't hear. A mercy mission. Did you hear that?
And I think that's going to be a challenge.
Yeah. So many times when I was involved in anti-racism work and in a coalition we put together in Hartford, Connecticut for justice and equity, and a lot of blacks and whites and Hispanics were working together, it became very apparent that the black and Hispanic leaders needed those of us who were white to understand what is wrong with charity. That's what charity, we should stop using the word, get it out of our heads. The only way we can be charitable if we're better off than somebody else. That's the only way you can be charitable. And charity doesn't really change people's lives. Do you understand that? It makes them less uncomfortable, maybe less hungry, but that old thing about don't give me a fish, teach me how to fish. So if we become one with that other, there's an old Hebrew understanding. It's where the Hebrew, now the Judeo-Christian understanding of justice comes from. Justice is more like an equilibrium of all the people, where no one goes without something they really need. But the idea is that if one is suffering, all are suffering. So this idea that Paul has given us in his letter to Corinth about, so if it was a Jew that I was trying to bring to Christ, I was a Jew. Think of it, I became one with them. Do you think we could get to the point where other person's suffering is now ours? And we don't want to turn them into us, but we want to get rid of the suffering because it's now our suffering? Do you think we could? Joe? Sure. If you have a job to give them. Here's something that is a real truth for a lot of people in our world, and we're going to meet a lot of them. In fact, we already know some of them if we let ourselves think. People they've forgotten how to live in hope. The concept of being hopeful and going forward doesn't even occur to them anymore. If we become one with that person, that doesn't mean we lose our hopefulness, our living in hope. It means that we have to join with them and get them to be willing to take that scary step along with us toward that which might be hopeful. Does that make some sense? That's where a lot of people are in their lives. I don't know how some people get out of bed in the morning. I don't know if I could. I mean, why? What's the use? Just going to be another rotten day, you know. So, and that's more than depression for some people. That's reality that they see every day. You can do something for them. You. Everyone here can be like Paul was. Everyone here. That's what it means if we say Jesus is still calling us. Come and follow me. To give ourselves to another is a lot more than charity. It's to find a way not for them to become one with us, but we make the first step and we become one with them. So becoming, first to become, that's the trick to mission. That's the way to give the love of Christ to another person. Become one with. And I don't know about you. That's hard for me. It's real hard for me. And if I know that the rest of you are doing it, I'm more likely to take the chance too. Those with ears to hear, let them hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Amen.